Kurt Cobain was worth $50 million when he hired a divorce lawyer. 1 week later, he was dead, and Courtney inherited everything. Kurt scheduled an appointment with his estate attorney for April 13, 1994, to remove Courtney from his will and restructure custody of their daughter Frances. But he died on April 5 before he could change anything. And police found papers in Courtney's possession where she'd been practicing Kurt's signature and handwriting for weeks before his death. This video reveals why Kurt wanted to leave Courtney, what his divorce attorney was preparing to file, how much money Courtney stood to lose if Kurt survived another week, and why the will that made Courtney a multimillionaire might not have been the will Kurt actually wanted. The divorce attorney picked up the phone on March 30, 1994. "I need to end my marriage, and I need to protect my daughter." Kurt Cobain's voice was quiet but determined. He'd made his decision. "When do you want to start proceedings?" "Immediately, but quietly. I don't want Courtney to know until the papers are ready." They scheduled an appointment for April 1 to begin divorce filings, to discuss custody arrangements, to restructure his will. Kurt never made it to that appointment. 6 days later, he was dead, and Courtney Love inherited everything he'd been planning to take away from her. The attorney kept notes from that phone call. They've never been made public, but they documented Kurt's final attempt to escape a marriage he described as destroying me. He almost made it, almost changed his will, almost filed for divorce, but someone made sure he ran out of time. Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love married on February 24, 1992, in Hawaii. It was impulsive, chaotic. Both were using drugs heavily. Friends thought it was a mistake. But Kurt believed in marriage, believed in family, wanted to make it work. For 2 years he tried. By early 1994, he'd given up. The marriage had become toxic. Fights that turned violent, drug use that spiraled out of control. Courtney's jealousy of Kurt's fame and Nirvana's success. And most importantly, Kurt's realization that Courtney wanted his money more than she wanted him. Friends noticed the change in Kurt during late 90s. He stopped talking about Courtney positively, stopped defending her to people who criticized her, started making comments about getting out. Dylan Carlson, Kurt's close friend, he told me in January 1994 that he was done, that the marriage was over, that he needed to protect Frances from the chaos. Another friend, musician Mark Lanigan, Kurt said Courtney was unstable, that she was using more drugs than he was, that he was worried about Frances's safety. Kurt's sister Kim Cobain, he called me in February, said he was planning to leave Courtney, asked if Frances could stay with me for a while until he got things sorted out. Multiple witnesses, multiple statements, all saying the same thing. Kurt wanted out of the marriage by early 1994. But divorce meant dividing assets, and Kurt's assets were substantial. Nirvana's catalog was worth an estimated $50 million in that number would grow to over $450 million by 20. Kurt owned the majority share of Nirvana's music. He wrote most of the songs. His estate would control the catalog and receive the bulk of royalties forever. Under Washington state community property law, anything earned during the marriage belonged equally to both spouses. If Kurt and Courtney divorced, Courtney would be entitled to half of Nirvana's value, roughly $25 million immediately, plus half of all future earnings. But that's only if Kurt was alive when they divorced. If Kurt died before filing for divorce, his will would determine who got everything. And Kurt's will, written in 1992 shortly after their marriage, left everything to Courtney. By March 1994, Kurt realized the trap he was in. He wanted to leave Courtney, but leaving her meant giving her half of everything he'd created, half of Nirvana, half of his legacy. Staying with her meant enduring a toxic marriage, watching their daughter grow up in chaos, slowly destroying himself. He was trapped, unless he could change his will before she found out about the divorce. That's why Kurt called the divorce attorney on March 30th. He wanted to move fast, file for divorce and restructure his will simultaneously, before Courtney knew what was happening. But moving fast meant taking risks, and someone was watching his every move. When Kurt and Courtney married in 1992, they didn't sign a prenuptial agreement. Kurt's manager and attorneys had urged him to get one, protect Nirvana's assets, protect his future earnings, but Kurt refused. "I'm not planning to get divorced," he told them. "I don't need a prenup." That decision would prove catastrophic. Without a prenup, Washington state community property law applied automatically. Everything earned during the marriage was jointly owned 50-50. Nirvana released Nevermind in September 1991, before the marriage. But the bulk of the album's earnings came after the marriage. In Utero was released in September 1993, well into the marriage. Most of Nirvana's fortune was earned during the marriage, which meant Courtney had legal claim to half of it. Kurt's attorney tried to explain the implications to him in "If you divorce, she gets half. There's no way around it without a prenup." Kurt was devastated. He'd created Nirvana, written the songs, built the band from nothing, and because he'd gotten married without protecting his assets, Courtney, who had nothing to do with Nirvana's success, would take half. "What if I change my will?" Kurt asked. "Leave everything to Frances instead. That only matters if you die." If you're alive and divorced, the will is irrelevant. Community property law applies. So the only way Courtney doesn't get half is if I die before we divorce. The attorney nodded. Kurt sat quietly for a moment, then said, "That's not going to happen. I'll figure something else out." But there was nothing else to figure out. The law was clear. Divorce meant Courtney got $25 million minimum, unless Kurt died first. In late March 1994, Kurt met with a different attorney, one who specialized in contentious divorces. This attorney later provided notes from their meeting to private investigator Tom Grant. According to those notes, Kurt wanted to pursue divorce on grounds of Courtney's drug use, argue she was an unfit mother, seek full custody of Frances. If Kurt could prove Courtney was a danger to their daughter, he might be able to reduce her financial settlement, maybe even eliminate it entirely. "But you'd have to prove she's using," the attorney told him, "and prove you're not." Kurt admitted he was still using heroin occasionally, but claimed he was trying to quit, that Courtney was using more heavily, and refused to stop. "I need to protect Frances," Kurt said. "Whatever it costs, whatever I have to do." The attorney told him it would be a difficult case, expensive, public, ugly. "I don't care," Kurt said. "I'm done." They scheduled a follow-up appointment for April 13th to review a drafted divorce filing and discuss custody strategy. Kurt never made it to that appointment. Kurt's will, drafted in 1992, was simple. Everything to Courtney Love if Kurt died. If Courtney was deceased, everything to Frances Cobain. That's it. No trusts, no conditions, no protections. Just, I leave my entire estate to my wife Courtney Love Cobain. By March 1994, Kurt wanted that will changed, desperately. He contacted his estate attorney, said he needed to restructure immediately. The attorney scheduled an appointment for April 13, 1994. Kurt's new will was going to remove Courtney entirely, leave everything directly to Frances in a trust, appoint Kurt's sister Kim as trustee. If that will had been executed, Courtney would have gotten nothing when Kurt died. But Kurt died on April 5th, 8 days before the appointment, and so the 1992 will remained valid. Courtney inherited everything. The timing is suspicious for several reasons. First, how did Courtney not know Kurt was planning to change his will? Kurt told multiple friends about it, told his sister, told his attorneys, but apparently didn't tell his wife? Or did she know? And did she realize she had a narrow window to act before Kurt changed everything? Second, the appointment was scheduled for April 13th, a specific date Kurt had chosen. Kurt died on April 5th. If someone wanted to stop Kurt from changing his will, they had an 8-day window to act. That's exactly what happened. Third, Kurt's estate attorney later said something strange in an interview. Kurt called me on April 4th, the day before he died, said he wanted to move the appointment up, make it sooner. He sounded urgent. The attorney checked his calendar, couldn't fit Kurt in earlier than April 13th. "Can you at least draft the new will and messenger it to me?" Kurt asked. "I'll review it and sign it. Then we can file it when I see you on the 13th. The attorney said he'd try to get a draft done, but he was busy. Might take a few days. "Please hurry," Kurt said. "It's important." That was the last time the attorney spoke to Kurt. The next day, Kurt was dead, and the new will was never drafted, never messengered, never signed. Kurt had tried to rush it, tried to change things before it was too late, but someone made sure he ran out of time. After Kurt's death, police searched the house at 171 Lake Washington Boulevard. They were looking for evidence related to Kurt's death, drugs, notes, anything that explained what happened. What they found in Courtney's belongings was disturbing. Multiple sheets of paper, covered with Kurt's name, Kurt's signature, Kurt's handwriting. Courtney had been practicing writing like Kurt, over and over, dozens of attempts to replicate his signature and letter formations. The practice sheets were photographed and documented, entered into evidence. When questioned, Courtney claimed she'd been practicing Kurt's signature for business purposes. "I needed to sign documents on his behalf sometimes, for the band, for contracts, so I practiced his signature." But that explanation doesn't hold up. First, why would Courtney need to sign documents on Kurt's behalf? He was alive and capable of signing his own documents. Second, the practice sheets didn't just include his signature. They included full sentences, phrases, letter formations. She wasn't just learning to sign his name, she was learning to write like him. Third, some of the practice sheets included phrases that appeared in Kurt's alleged suicide note. "I love you. For Frances. Please keep going." Why would Courtney be practicing writing those specific phrases? Handwriting expert Reginald Alton reviewed the practice sheets in 2014. This is classic forgery preparation. Someone learning another person's writing style so they can replicate it convincingly. Could she have been practicing for innocent reasons? Possible but unlikely. The level of detail, the pressure points, the letter slants, the specific phrases. This is what forgers do before creating a document they want to pass off as authentic, like a suicide note. Exactly like a suicide note. The practice sheets suggest Courtney was preparing to forge something in Kurt's handwriting, and the timing is suspicious. Friends reported seeing these practice sheets in the house as early as March 9, a month before Kurt died, before he supposedly wrote his suicide note. Courtney was practicing Kurt's handwriting before the note that would be attributed to him even existed. On March 25, 1994, Courtney organized an intervention for Kurt. She gathered some of Kurt's friends and bandmates, told them Kurt was using too much heroin, said they needed to confront him, get him into rehab. The group met at Kurt and Courtney's house, confronted Kurt, told him he needed help. Kurt agreed, said he'd go to rehab, left for Exodus Recovery Center in Los Angeles on March 30th. But several people who attended that intervention later said it felt strange. Bassist Chris Novoselic, it felt staged, like Courtney was performing. She kept talking about how worried she was, but it felt manipulative. Friend Dylan Carlson, Kurt wasn't surprised. It was like he expected it, like Courtney had warned him it was coming. Manager Danny Goldberg, the whole thing was Courtney's idea. She organized it. She controlled who was there. It felt less like helping Kurt and more like, I don't know, establishing a narrative. What narrative? That Kurt was dangerously unstable, that he was using heavily, that he was at risk of hurting himself. A narrative that would be very useful if Kurt ended up dead, and questions were asked. Kurt left for Exodus on March 30th, the same day he called the divorce attorney. At Exodus, Kurt was miserable. He didn't want to be there, felt like he was being held against his will. He called friends, said Courtney was controlling everything, monitoring his calls, deciding who could visit. On April 1st, Kurt climbed the fence and left Exodus, took a plane back to Seattle. He called Dylan Carlson from the airport. Don't tell Courtney I'm back. I need time alone. Dylan picked Kurt up, drove him home. Kurt went to the greenhouse above the garage. That was April 1st, the last confirmed sighting of Kurt alive. 4 days later, he was dead. But here's what's suspicious about the intervention and rehab. Courtney organized an intervention claiming Kurt was dangerously unstable, got him into rehab, established officially that he was at risk. Then Kurt left rehab, came back to Seattle, and died within days. It looks like Courtney was building a paper trail, creating evidence that Kurt was suicidal, that he was out of control, so when he died, everyone would say, of course he killed himself. Courtney warned us. She tried to help him. The intervention wasn't about helping Kurt. It was about establishing the narrative that would explain his death. Kurt Cobain died on April 5, 1994. Because he died before changing his will, Courtney Love inherited his entire estate. Estimated value in 1994, $50 million. But Nirvana's music would become far more valuable after Kurt's death. By 2006, when Courtney sold 25% of her share in Nirvana's catalog, it was valued at $250 million. By 2024, Nirvana's catalog sold to Primary Wave for $450 million. Courtney's share of that sale, over $100 million. Dead, Kurt made Courtney wealthier than he ever could have alive. If Kurt had lived another week, if he'd made it to that April 13th appointment, if he'd changed his will, Courtney would have gotten nothing. Frances would have inherited everything in trust. Courtney would have been cut out completely. But Kurt died 8 days too soon, before he could restructure, before he could protect Frances, before he could remove Courtney. And Courtney became wealthy beyond measure from Kurt's death. Some might call that incredibly bad luck for Kurt, incredibly good luck for Courtney. Others might call it motive. Frances Bean Cobain inherited Kurt's estate when she turned 18 in 2010. By then, Courtney had been controlling the estate for 16 years, managing the money, making decisions about Nirvana's catalog and Kurt's image. When Frances took control, she immediately discovered problems. Millions were missing. Money that should have been in the estate accounts was gone. Courtney claimed it was spent on estate management and legal fees. Frances hired forensic accountants. They found that Courtney had been taking money far beyond what was reasonable or legal. Frances sued her own mother in 2010. The case settled privately, but insiders say Frances recovered less than half of what Courtney had taken. Courtney had spent 16 years draining Kurt's estate, taking money that belonged to Frances. And when Frances finally got control, much of her inheritance was already gone. Rhonda claimed the divorce attorney Kurt contacted on March 30th kept his files, notes from their phone call, draft paperwork, strategy memos. After Kurt died, the attorney put those files in storage, figured they were no longer relevant. In 2006, private investigator Tom Grant contacted that attorney, asked to see Kurt's files. The attorney agreed, went to retrieve them. The files were gone. Someone had accessed the storage unit, removed only Kurt's files, left everything else. I don't know how they knew the files were there, the attorney said. I never told anyone. The storage unit was in a different name, but someone found them and took them. What was in those files? Everything. Kurt's full divorce strategy, financial documentation showing what Courtney would get in the divorce versus what she'd get if Kurt died. It was all there. And now, whoever took them didn't want anyone seeing how much Courtney stood to lose if Kurt survived. Those files would have proved Kurt was actively pursuing divorce in March 19. Kurt wanted to change his will to exclude Courtney. Courtney would lose $50+ million if Kurt divorced her. Courtney would inherit $50+ million if Kurt died before the divorce. That's clear financial motive for murder. And someone made sure those files disappeared before anyone could use them to reopen Kurt's case. Who had access to the attorney's storage unit? Who knew the files existed? Who had reason to destroy evidence of Courtney's financial motive? The attorney never found out. Reported the theft to police. Nothing came of it. The files are gone. The evidence of Kurt's divorce plans is gone. All that remains are the attorney's memories and a few notes he'd kept separately. Not enough to build a case, but enough to know the truth. Kurt Cobain has been dead for over 30 years, but his 1992 will still controls his legacy, still determines who profits from his music, still shapes how he's remembered. That will was written when Kurt was 25, when he believed his marriage would last, when he trusted Courtney completely. By age 27, he wanted to change it, wanted to restructure, wanted to protect Frances and remove Courtney, but he died before he could. And so a will he desperately wanted to change became his final word. Courtney Love controlled Nirvana's catalog and Kurt's image for 16 years, made decisions about re-releases, documentaries, merchandise, decisions Kurt might not have wanted, decisions that prioritized profit over artistic integrity. Frances Bean Cobain now controls her father's estate. She's been more protective, more careful about how Kurt's legacy is used. But for 16 years, Courtney profited from Kurt's death in ways he specifically tried to prevent before he died. She inherited the money he wanted to leave to Frances. She controlled the music he wanted protected. She shaped the narrative about his death to deflect suspicion from herself. And she did it all because Kurt died 8 days before he could change his will. 8 days. That's all it came down to. Kurt needed 8 more days to protect his daughter, to remove Courtney, to control his own legacy. Someone made sure he didn't get those 8 days. Kurt Cobain was worth $50 million when he decided to leave Courtney Love. He hired an attorney, scheduled appointments, planned to change his will. 1 week later, he was dead, and Courtney inherited everything. The timing is suspicious. The financial motive is clear. The evidence of forgery preparation exists. But Courtney Love has never been charged with anything related to Kurt's death. She's maintained for 30 years that she loved Kurt, that she wanted him alive, that she had nothing to do with his death. And without proof, without reopening the investigation, without examining financial records and divorce documents, the accusations remain speculation, but the facts remain. Kurt wanted to divorce Courtney. Kurt wanted to change his will to exclude her. Courtney would have lost $50 million if Kurt lived another week. Courtney inherited $50 million when Kurt died before making those changes. Courtney was practicing Kurt's handwriting before he allegedly wrote his suicide note, and Kurt died exactly in the narrow window between deciding to leave and actually filing the paperwork. That's not proof of murder, but it's certainly motive, and motive plus suspicious death plus physical evidence that doesn't match suicide equals reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt that Seattle police have refused to investigate for 30 years, because investigating would mean acknowledging what everyone already suspects. Kurt Cobain didn't kill himself. He was killed to protect someone's inheritance, and that someone is still spending his money.